The events described in this narrative are based on documentary evidence, recorded testimony, and first-person accounts gathered over 18 months of investigation. Certain names and identifying details of protected witnesses have been modified to prevent harm. All claims related to financial networks, corporate entities, and public figures have been reviewed for accuracy by independent legal and forensic experts. Some events remain under federal investigation. Some questions have no answers yet. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't care about your timeline. The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake for 3 hours already, sitting at my kitchen table in Baltimore with a glass of wine I hadn't touched, staring at a folder that someone had slipped under my apartment door sometime between midnight and when I'd finally gotten up to check. No knock, no note, just a manila envelope, unmarked, with my name typed on a label, not handwritten, typed. Like whoever left it didn't want me to have anything as intimate as their handwriting. Inside was a single document, 42 pages, a financial audit trail from a shell company registered in Delaware in 1987, a company called Meridian Coastal Partners LLC. And highlighted in yellow, on page 11, was a wire transfer. $340,000. Dated March 4, 2019. Sender, an account routed through a private bank in Luxembourg. Recipient, a real estate holding company in Naples, Florida. The name attached to that Naples account was Vincent Anthony Caruso. I stared at that name for a long time before I picked up the phone. Because Vincent Anthony Caruso had been murdered in 1994. I know this because I covered his death. I was 26 years old, a junior crime reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Caruso killing was one of the first major mob stories I ever touched. He was 41 when he died, shot twice in the chest in the parking garage of a hotel in Atlantic City on a Thursday afternoon in February. The case was closed within 18 months. The man convicted of the shooting, a soldier in the Calabrese crime family named Dominic Dino Ferranti, died in federal prison in 2011. The case was considered solved, closed, archived, and now someone was sending me proof that Vincent Caruso had been moving money through shell accounts in 2019. 25 years after his funeral. When the phone rang at 2:17, I almost didn't answer. The number was blocked. I almost let it go to voicemail. But some old reflex from 20 years of journalism, made me pick up. The voice on the other end was male, low, careful, like someone speaking into a cloth. He said 4 words, "Don't trust the file," and then he hung up. I sat there for a very long time after that, the wine glass sweating a ring onto the folder, the kitchen clock ticking, and I thought, whoever sent me this document knows I have it. And whoever called me knows I have it too. And those two people, if they're different people, are telling me opposite things. That was the night my life changed. And not in any way I would have chosen. My name is Rachel Morrow. I'm 52 years old. I was an investigative journalist for 23 years, Philadelphia Inquirer, then a stint at the Chicago Tribune, then freelance for the last 7 years working mostly on organized crime, federal corruption, and the legal industry's quiet relationship with both. I've testified before 2 grand juries. I've had 3 sources die before trials. I've been sued 4 times and won 3 of them. The 4th is still pending, which tells you something about the pace of American justice. I'm telling you this not to establish credentials, but to explain something important. I am not an amateur. I don't panic easily. I have a lawyer on speed dial and a therapist I see every other Thursday. I know the difference between a story and a trap, and I've learned, slowly, painfully, that sometimes those 2 things are the same. What I'm about to tell you took 18 months of my life. It cost me a relationship, 2 friendships, 22 pounds of body weight, and a level of sleep I don't think I'll ever fully recover. It's the story of a dead man who wasn't dead, a murder that wasn't a murder, and a network of power, legal, political, criminal, so deeply interwoven that I'm still not sure where one ends and the other begins. I'm telling it now because I think I have to. Because the alternative, sitting on it, filing it away, convincing myself it's too dangerous, feels like a kind of complicity I can't live with. But I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I don't know how this ends. Not really. And if someone tells you they know how stories like this end, they're either lying or they haven't been paying attention. Let me take you back. Not to 2019, when the file appeared under my door. Back further, back to 1994, to Atlantic City, to a cold February morning that smelled like salt and diesel and the particular kind of desperation you can only find in a place built on people's willingness to lose. The Calabrese family had been operating in the Philadelphia-South Jersey corridor since the 1950s. By the 90s, they were one of the last functioning traditional American Cosa Nostra operations on the East Coast. Not the biggest. New York still held that title with brutal consistency, but they were notable for their particular combination of violence and sophistication. They had fingers in Atlantic City's casino economy going back to the resort's international days. They had relationships with city councilmen, with labor union officials, with at least 2 state assemblymen whose names I will tell you shortly. And they had lawyers, very good lawyers. Vincent Caruso was not a made man. That's important. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a capo, wasn't formally initiated into the Calabrese structure. He was what people in that world called an associate, a civilian with useful skills who existed in the orbit of organized crime without being formally part of it. His skill was financial. He had a degree from Temple University in accounting. He'd worked briefly at a legitimate firm in Center City, Philadelphia. And by the early 1980s he was doing books for 3 different Calabrese-affiliated businesses in South Philly, a restaurant supply company, a waste management contractor, and a laundromat chain that made considerably more money than the number of laundromats warranted. He was good at making things look clean that weren't. By 1993, according to sources I would later speak to and documents I would later obtain, Caruso had begun to attract attention from the FBI. Not just routine organized crime surveillance, something more specific. Agents in the Philadelphia field office believed Caruso had knowledge of a particular set of financial arrangements that went far beyond the Calabrese family's normal operations. Arrangements that involved money moving through legitimate legal entities, law firms, specifically, in ways that would constitute serious federal crimes for the attorneys involved. The lead agent on that surveillance was a man named Gerald Hoyt. He's retired now, lives outside Scottsdale, Arizona. I'll come back to him. In February 1994, Vincent Caruso was shot and killed in the parking garage of the Harrah's Hotel in Atlantic City. 2 witnesses placed Dominic Ferranti at the scene. A third witness, a parking attendant named Miguel Santos, gave a detailed description that matched Ferranti's physical appearance and clothing. Ferranti was arrested, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. He maintained his innocence until he died. At the time, the story seemed simple. Caruso had gotten too close to the FBI. The Calabreses had him killed before he could talk. Ferranti was the shooter. Case closed. That's what everyone believed for 25 years. That's what I believed. Until March 4, 2019, when someone wired $340,000 into an account belonging to a man who had supposedly been in the ground since 1994. The morning after the phone call, I didn't call my lawyer. I didn't call my editor. I didn't have a regular editor anymore, hadn't for 2 years. Since the magazine I'd been contributing to folded in that particular quiet disaster that has been decimating print journalism since approximately forever. I called the one person I trusted more than anyone else in this kind of situation. Her name is Diane Chu. She's a former forensic accountant who spent 12 years at the SEC before leaving to do private investigative work. She's Chinese American, 55 years old, she's been divorced twice and has a daughter at Duke, and she has a memory for financial architecture that genuinely frightens me sometimes. We'd worked together on 3 previous investigations. She's the closest thing I have to a partner. I sent her a photograph of the document before I'd even made coffee. I texted, "Look at page 11. The name." She called me back in 11 minutes. "Where did you get this?" she said. "It came under my door." Silence. Then, "Rachel, I know. This account, the Luxembourg routing, I've seen this structure before. This isn't a small operation. This is layered. Whoever set this up knows exactly what they're doing. Can you trace it? Maybe. Give me time." "But Rachel," she paused. "If this name is real, if Caruso is actually alive somewhere, then someone went to extraordinary lengths to make the world think he was dead. Which means someone had a reason, and that reason is still operational. This isn't history. Whatever this is, it's still running." I looked at the document spread across my kitchen table. 42 pages. Wire transfers, account numbers, corporate registration filings, routing codes. Someone had assembled this carefully. Someone had wanted me specifically to see it. The question was, why me? And why now? I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do. Digging. My first call was to the Philadelphia Inquirer archives. I have an old relationship with a woman in their records department named Paulette Reese who has been with the paper for 31 years and who, bless her, still answers her phone. I asked her to pull everything they had on the Caruso murder from 1993 to 1996. The stories, the trial coverage, the editorials, any supplementary material that hadn't been published. Paulette said she'd scan what she could. My second call was to the New Jersey State Police. I have a contact there, a detective sergeant named Frank Maloney who works cold cases and who owed me a favor from a story I'd helped him with about an unsolved arson in Camden in 2016. I asked him, without explaining why, to tell me everything he knew about the Caruso case from the investigative side. Not the trial, the investigation. He got quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That case was federal. We were tangential, but I'll tell you something. There were guys in our office who always thought that conviction was strange." Strange how? Ferranti was a leg breaker. He wasn't an assassin. The shooting in that garage, the way it was done, it was clean. Professional. People thought it was above his level. But he was convicted. He was convicted, Frank said. That's not always the same thing. My third call was to the federal courthouse in Philadelphia, requesting public records related to the Ferranti trial. Court transcripts, exhibit lists, the autopsy report, and my fourth call, the one I almost didn't make, was to a retired FBI agent named Gerald Hoyt in Scottsdale, Arizona. He answered on the second ring. When I told him why I was calling, there was a pause that lasted almost 10 seconds. In 20 years of journalism, I've learned that pauses are information. They tell you what someone's calculating, what they're deciding. Finally he said, "I think you should come to Arizona." I flew to Phoenix on a Tuesday. Drove a rental car south on the 101 to Scottsdale, through that particular southwestern landscape that always makes me feel like I'm in someone else's dream. All terracotta and mesquite and sky that goes on forever. Gerald Hoyt lived in a house in a retirement community called Sunrise Estates. He was 73 years old, shorter than I'd expected, with white hair cut close to his head and the particular stillness of a man who has spent decades learning not to show what he's thinking. He made coffee. We sat on his back patio looking at the desert. He didn't start talking right away. He asked me how I'd gotten the document. I told him what I knew. It appeared under my door, no sender, no note. I showed him photographs I'd taken of every page. He looked at the photographs for a long time. His expression didn't change. "You need to understand something," he said finally. "What happened in 1994 was not. It was not a straightforward thing. The Ferranti conviction, the Caruso murder, there were elements of that situation that were managed. I'm not going to tell you who managed them, not yet. But I want you to understand that there were people inside the bureau, not many, but some, who knew that the official story wasn't the whole story." What was the whole story? He looked at his coffee. Caruso wasn't just a bookkeeper for the Calabreses. By 1993, he was managing a flow of money that had nothing to do with the Calabrese family's ordinary operations. He was a conduit, a facilitating point. For what? For a real estate investment network that involved three things simultaneously: organized crime capital looking for legitimate placement, political campaign financing, and a law firm, a very respected, very prominent law firm, that was providing the structural architecture to make all of it invisible. He said the firm's name quietly. I'm going to hold it back for now, because I believe in sequence, and because the name itself, when I'm ready to give it to you, needs the weight of everything that precedes it. When we started getting close to Caruso, Hoyt continued, when we started understanding what he knew and what he could testify to, things got complicated. There was pressure, not overt, never overt, but the kind of pressure that comes when a case is discussed at levels above your field office. When people start asking questions about scope, about jurisdiction, about whether certain cooperating witnesses are really what they appear to be. Are you telling me the FBI was compromised? I'm telling you the FBI is an institution made of human beings. And some of those human beings have loyalties and interests that don't always point in the same direction as the investigation. He stood up and went inside. He came back carrying a folder. He set it on the table between us without opening it. I've been holding on to this for 22 years, he said. Waiting for someone credible to ask the right questions. The document that came under your door. That's not a leak. That's a signal. Someone is trying to open a door. But Rachel, he looked directly at me for the first time. You need to understand what's on the other side of that door before you walk through it. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. Tell me, I said. What Hoyt had was a surveillance transcript. Internal FBI document. Dated November 17, 1993, 3 months before Caruso's alleged murder. It was a recording made during a wiretap operation on a phone line belonging to a Center City, Philadelphia law office. The conversation was between two individuals, identified in the transcript only as Subject A and Subject B. Subject A said, "The accountant is going to be a problem." Subject B said, "How much of a problem?" Subject A, "He keeps copies. That's the problem, not the man himself, the copies." Subject B, "Then we manage the copies." Subject A, "We manage everything, including the narrative." Subject B, "And the accountant?" A pause. Then Subject A, "The accountant cooperates, or the accountant disappears. Either way, the problem is solved." Below the transcript, in Hoyt's own handwriting, were two names. The identities he'd been able to assign to Subject A and Subject B based on voice analysis and contextual intelligence. Subject A was Thomas Reardon, senior partner at the law firm Reardon, Callahan. I called Diane from the car. "Reardon, Callahan," she said immediately. "I know that firm. They dissolved in 2008. After Reardon died, the remaining partners merged into a larger corporate law practice. But Reardon, he was on the board of at least 4 different real estate investment vehicles in the 90s. I've been looking at the Delaware corporate records since you sent me the file. Rachel, Meridian Coastal Partners, the shell company in the document, it shares a registered agent with 2 other LLCs that were both linked to Reardon's practice. So Reardon was connected to the money that went to Caruso's account in 2019. 5 years after Reardon died. Yes, which means either someone kept the architecture running after he was gone, or someone resurrected it. Who had access to those structures after his death? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But Rachel, the real estate holding company in Naples, Florida. The one receiving the money. I did a property search. It holds a condo in a development called Pelican Bay, a 2-bedroom unit, purchased 2017, current assessed value approximately $890,000. Who lives there? A beat. The owner of record is a woman named Sandra Moretti, 63 years old, no criminal record, no professional licenses, nothing interesting on the surface. But her maiden name, I gripped the steering wheel. Her maiden name is Caruso. I need to stop here and tell you something about myself that's relevant. Because this story isn't just about Vincent Caruso, or Thomas Reardon, or the money, or the congressman whose name I'm still holding back. It's also about me, about the way I do this work, about what it costs. I have a daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 23, she lives in Seattle, She works for a tech nonprofit doing something I only partially understand involving digital literacy for underserved communities. She is the best thing I have ever done. We are close, mostly. Closer than most mothers and daughters I know. But we have had our difficulties, and most of them trace back to the same source. The fact that this work, this particular, consuming, dangerous work, has taken things from both of us that we can't fully name. I didn't call Lily from Arizona. I thought about it, but I didn't want to worry her, and I didn't want to lie, and with Lily there's never an option that avoids both of those things simultaneously when a story gets serious. I called my therapist instead, Dr. Miriam Osei, office in Hampton, Baltimore. I got her voicemail and left a message that said, essentially, that I was in the middle of something and I would explain when I saw her Thursday. She called me back 20 minutes later, which she almost never does. You sound different, she said. Different how? Accelerated, like the beginning of something. She's been doing this long enough that she can hear it. The particular frequency of me when I'm inside something real. Are you being careful? She said. And I said yes, and I meant it, but I was also already not being careful, in the way I never am when something has its hooks in me. Because I had booked a flight to Naples, Florida for the following morning. Because I was going to find Sandra Moretti, this woman with the Caruso name, and look at her face. And whatever she did when she saw me would tell me more than any document. Naples, Florida in April has a particular quality of light that's almost aggressive. Everything gleams. The water in the Gulf is the color of something you'd find in a painting, and the condominiums along the coast are white and enormous and placid in the way of things that cost a great deal of money to maintain. Pelican Bay is a planned community behind a gate. I had to talk my way past the security booth with a story about visiting a friend, which worked because I have done this enough times that I am very good at the particular combination of confidence and irrelevance that gets you through gates. I found Sandra Moretti's building. I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes trying to decide exactly what I was going to say. I knew her name. I knew she had the Caruso maiden name. I knew she owned a unit that had been purchased with money flowing through a chain of shell accounts linked to a man who should have been dead for 25 years. What I didn't know was whether she was a victim or a participant. Whether she was hiding something or hiding from something. I knocked on her door at 11:15 in the morning. She answered almost immediately, like she'd been expecting someone. She was small, 5'2", maybe, with short gray hair and the slightly overdone tan you see on women her age in Florida who spend a lot of time outdoors. She was wearing a white linen shirt and she was holding a phone. When she saw me, when she looked at my face and I looked at hers, something happened. It was fast and then it was gone. A flicker of something in her eyes that I recognized because I've seen it before. It's the look of a person who has been waiting for a specific moment for a very long time, and the moment has arrived, and they're not sure whether they're relieved or terrified. Mrs. Moretti, I said. My name is Rachel Morrow. I'm a journalist. I'd like to talk to you about your brother. She didn't say which brother. She didn't ask how I knew. She stepped back from the door and let me in. The condo was decorated in the careful, impersonal style of someone who has learned not to accumulate things that can identify her. The furniture was nice but generic. There were no photographs on the walls. There was one photograph on a bookshelf, a small one, in a plain frame, of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, laughing at something off camera. I looked at it while Sandra poured us both water from a pitcher in her kitchen. She sat across from me at a glass table. She held her water glass with both hands. I knew someone would come eventually, she said. I didn't know it would be a journalist. I expected, I don't know, lawyers, maybe, or worse. Mrs. Moretti, I have evidence that money was transferred into a real estate account connected to your property in 2019. From a shell company in Delaware that's linked to a network that goes back to the early 90s. I have reason to believe your brother Vincent may be alive, she said, just like that, flat, declarative, 25 years of maintained fiction, and she said it like she'd been waiting 25 years to say it. I made myself stay very still. In these moments, The worst thing you can do is show the magnitude of what you're hearing, because people feel your reaction and it changes what they decide to tell you. Where is he? I said. I don't know. Genuinely. We have a system. Money moves. I don't ask where from. I've learned not to. There's a lawyer. Not the same one, the old one died. There's a new one, who manages the accounts. I get what I need. Vincent and I, we send each other signals. Not contact. Signals. Through a process that I won't explain because I don't know enough about who you are yet. How did his death happen? The shooting in Atlantic City. Who was shot? She looked at her water glass for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were wet but she wasn't crying. A man named Emilio Varga. He was Hungarian. He had no family in this country, no one who would look for him. Vincent told me only what he had to. He said there was a man who agreed, for a sum of money, to be in that garage. He said the man was promised something that wasn't delivered. He said he has carried that with him every day. I thought about this, the weight of it. A man, Emilio Varga, whoever he was, lying in a casket under Vincent Caruso's name. Dominic Ferranti convicted of a murder that wasn't what it appeared to be. A whole architecture of false facts, built on what was essentially a human sacrifice. Who arranged it? I said. You know who arranged it, she said. If you've gotten this far. You know. I want to hear you say it. She shook her head. Not yet. You're not ready. And neither am I. I flew back to Baltimore that night. I sat in the airport in Fort Myers for 2 hours eating a sandwich I didn't taste, making notes on my phone that were coded in a way only I would understand, a habit I developed years ago, after a source's text messages were subpoenaed in a case I was tangentially involved in. I've learned not to write things plainly until I'm ready to publish them. When I got home, my apartment had been entered. I know this not because anything was taken, nothing was. I know it because of 3 things: a book on my coffee table that I always leave spine up was spine down. The volume on my television was at 14, not 22, where I always leave it. And in my bathroom, the hand towel was folded. I never fold the hand towel. These are the kinds of small calibrations you develop when you've been in enough situations that made you paranoid enough to pay attention to them. I stood in my doorway for a full minute before I went in. I went room by room, slowly, methodically. No one was there. My laptop was where I'd left it. My filing cabinet was locked and appeared undisturbed. But someone had been in my space, and they'd either been careless or they'd been deliberate, leaving just enough disturbance that I'd know, without leaving anything that would justify a police report. That's a message, a professional message. I called Diane. My apartment was accessed. I said. A pause. Okay, don't stay there tonight. I'm not going to run. I didn't say run. I said don't stay there tonight. There's a difference. This is information management, Rachel. They want you scared. They want you making decisions from fear. So take one night somewhere else, sleep, and come back to this with your head clear. I went to a hotel, a Marriott in the Inner Harbor, paid cash for a room using money I keep in an envelope in my filing cabinet for exactly this kind of situation. Old habit from a mentor of mine, an editor at the Tribune named Carl Briggs, who used to say, always have walking around money, and always know 3 exits from any building you're in regularly. I couldn't sleep. I lay in the hotel room watching the ceiling and thinking about Emilio Varga. I didn't know anything about him yet, but I knew his name. And I knew that somewhere in the story of how he ended up in that parking garage in Atlantic City in February 1994, there was a gravity that I was going to have to reckon with. Because whatever Vincent Caruso had done to survive, whatever calculus he had accepted, a man had died in his place. And the people who arranged that had never been held accountable for anything. That felt like the center of it. Not the money, not the politics, the weight of an unacknowledged death. Diane called me at 7 a.m. the next morning with something that changed the shape of everything. She'd been working through the night. She does this, she runs on less sleep than anyone I know, tracing the corporate genealogy of Meridian Coastal Partners and the related shell structures. She'd found something in the Delaware Division of Corporations records that was publicly available but buried under enough layering that it would take a specific kind of trained attention to see. Meridian Coastal Partners had, in 2009, 15 years after Caruso's supposed death, been reorganized and its registered agent changed. The new registered agent was a firm in Wilmington called Atlantic Corporate Services. Standard Incorporation Mill, nothing remarkable. But Atlantic Corporate Services had, at various points, served as registered agent for 847 different corporate entities in Delaware. And one of those entities, registered in 2011, had a name that stopped me cold when Diane read it to me. The entity was called VCC Consulting Group, LLC. Vincent Caruso's initials. That's not a coincidence, Diane said. No, it's not. Someone was leaving breadcrumbs, deliberately, over years. The VCC registration, the Meridian connection, the Luxembourg routing, all of it would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it specifically. But to someone who knew what they were looking for, someone who knew the name, it's a thread. It's a path. Someone is helping us find him, I said. Someone is helping someone find him. We don't know yet if that someone is us. That distinction, that careful distinction, is why Diane is invaluable. I get pulled by the story. She maintains the geometry. Who registered VCC Consulting Group? I asked. Person of record is a corporate attorney in Wilmington named Peter Shaughnessy. He's real, he's currently practicing, and Rachel, he used to work at Reardon, Callahan. He was an associate there from 1989 to 1995. I set my coffee down. He left the year after the Caruso murder. 6 months after, Diane said. And he's been doing quiet corporate registration work ever since. Low profile, small firm, no litigation, no press. A man who makes himself invisible. I need to talk to him. Yes, but carefully. If he's been maintaining these structures for this long, he knows how to be careful too. And Rachel, if he's been maintaining them, he's complicit. At some level, he knows what he's part of. You need to decide how you're going to approach that. Peter Shaughnessy's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian on West 10th Street in Wilmington, Delaware. I drove up on a Thursday morning, no appointment, because in my experience, unexpected appearances in a professional setting create a particular kind of social pressure that appointments don't. People in offices feel the need to manage you when you simply appear. And in the act of management, they reveal things. His assistant, a young woman who looked like she was probably a paralegal student, asked if I had an appointment. I said I was a journalist working on a story about corporate governance and Delaware incorporation practices, which was true enough not to feel like a lie and specific enough not to seem threatening. She brought me into a small waiting room. There was a water cooler and 3 chairs and a framed print of the Delaware State Capitol building. 14 minutes later, Peter Shaughnessy opened the door. He was 58, heavy-set, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular look of a man who has spent decades making deliberate choices about how to seem unremarkable. His handshake was firm. His office was tidy in the way of someone who controls anxiety through organization. I sat across from his desk. I told him I was researching Delaware Shell Corporation structures and their historical uses in the Philadelphia and South Jersey real estate markets through the 1990s and 2000s. He was careful, measured. He gave me professional generalities for about 12 minutes. And then I said, as conversationally as I could manage, I wanted specifically to ask about a company called Meridian Coastal Partners, which I understand had some connection to Reardon, Callahan back in the day. The change was almost imperceptible, a very slight tightening around his eyes, a pause of maybe 1 beat longer than normal. I don't think I'm familiar with that entity, he said. You were at Reardon, Callahan from 1989 to 1995. That's correct. Thomas Reardon was your supervising partner. Among others, it was a large firm. Mr. Shaughnessy, I said, I think you know why I'm here. And I think you've been expecting someone to come for a long time. The question is whether you talk to me now, on your terms, or whether what I've already found becomes a story on my terms. Which is less comfortable for everyone? He looked at me for a long time. The silence in the room had a texture to it. Then he stood up, walked to his office door, and closed it. He came back and sat down. He took his reading glasses off his forehead and set them on his desk. He laced his fingers together. "What have you found?" he said. "Enough," I said. "Tell me the rest." What Peter Shaughnessy told me over the next 2.5 hours was not a confession. He was too careful for that, and I think he'd spent enough years in proximity to lawyers to know exactly where the lines were. But it was something close to a testimony, a careful, painful account of what he knew, filtered through years of compartmentalization and guilt and the very particular moral disease of a man who chose survival over integrity and has lived with that choice every day since. He confirmed that Thomas Reardon had been the architect of a financial structure that served as a laundering mechanism for money flowing from Calabrese family operations, and from at least 2 other organized crime groups, one based in Chicago and one in New Orleans, into legitimate real estate investments across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida. The mechanism used a web of Delaware-registered shells, a Luxembourg private banking relationship, and a series of real estate LLCs. The legitimate face of the operation was a real estate investment firm called Coastal Atlantic Development Partners, headquartered in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Caruso was the accountant who made it work. He understood the flow, managed the transfers, knew which numbers were real and which were constructed. By 1993, he knew too much. And when the FBI surveillance began to close in, Reardon understood that the risk wasn't just the Calabreses getting exposed. The risk was himself, his firm, and the political relationships that the network had bought over the years. "Who was the congressman?" I said. Shaughnessy looked at his desk. "I heard a name, once, in a conversation I wasn't meant to hear." "Tell me." "His name was William Farrell. He represented Pennsylvania's 7th Congressional District from 1988 to 2002. He left Congress to become a state superior court judge. He's been on the bench in Philadelphia since 2004. I wrote the name down. My hand was steady. I was proud of that. "He's a judge now, a very well-regarded one," Shaughnessy said. "Mentioned periodically for the federal bench." William Farrell. I knew the name in the vague way you know names that exist at a certain level of regional institutional prominence. I'd seen it in passing on the Enquirer's court's coverage. A solid, unremarkable judicial record. No scandals, nothing that had ever attracted attention. Nothing that had ever attracted my attention. "What did Farrell do?" I said. "What he was asked to do. What powerful men do when other powerful men ask them to do things. He used his position to facilitate, to inquire, to create pressure in the right places at the right times. When the Bureau's investigation of Caruso started becoming serious, when there was a risk of it going federal and implicating Reardon's network, there were conversations. At a level one wasn't in the room for. But Reardon came back from those conversations with certainty. He said the investigation would be managed. He said the problem would be resolved. And the resolution was staging Caruso's death. I believe so, yes. Who arranged the shooting? The man who died in Caruso's place. He shook his head. I don't know. That was operational. That was the Calabrese's work, or whoever they delegated it to. By that point, Reardon was very deliberate about not knowing the operational details. He knew the outcome he needed. He didn't need to know the process. But he knew a man died in Caruso's place. A very long pause. I believe he did. Yes. I looked at this man across his neat desk, in his careful small office, with his deliberate unremarkability. 25 years of knowing this. Of maintaining the structures that kept it operational. Of receiving small payments through channels that preserved his distance from all of it. "Why did you leave Reardon's firm in 1995? I asked. He looked at me directly for the first time in a while. "Because I had a daughter. She was 2 years old. And I decided I didn't want to be someone who. I decided there were things I wasn't willing to do. But there were also things I wasn't willing to undo. Because I was afraid. I've been afraid for 25 years. He looked at his hands. "I'm still afraid. Are you willing to put any of what you've told me on record?" He was quiet for a very long time. "Give me 6 weeks," he said. "Let me talk to someone. Let me think about what I'm willing to say and what I can live with. Can you give me that?" I said yes. I wasn't entirely sure I could keep the promise, but I said yes. Because sometimes you make promises in the service of the larger thing, and you do your best to honor them, and you carry the weight of the compromise. I drove back to Baltimore that evening and wrote for 5 hours straight. Not the story. Not yet. Just notes. Pages and pages of notes, organized by source, by document, by claim, by what could be verified and what couldn't. And then I did something I almost never do in the middle of an investigation. I called my daughter. Lily answered on the second ring, the way she always does for me. We talked about her work for a while. There was a grant she was excited about, something involving rural school districts in eastern Washington. She's good at what she does. She cares about things in a way that is completely her own and doesn't come from me, which is one of the things I'm most proud of. Then she said, "Mom, what's going on? You sound like you're in something." "I'm always in something. Not like this. This sounds different. My children, my one child, sees me more clearly than I usually want to be seen." "I'm working on something complicated," I said. "And I'm being careful." "Are you actually being careful, or are you telling me you're being careful?" There's a difference. She knows it. I know it. We both let the question sit in the air for a moment. "I have people around me," I said. "I have Diane. I have Frank Maloney. I have a lawyer on speed dial." "That's not the same as actually being careful," she said, and she wasn't wrong. And I told her I loved her and I got off the phone before she could press any harder. I sat in my apartment. I'd swept it professionally by this point, hired a security consultant named Vargas who charged $400 for 2 hours and found a small listening device attached to the underside of my router, and I thought about the cost of this. Not the professional cost, the personal one, the way that the pursuit of a truth this size has a gravity that pulls everything toward it. Relationships, sleep, normalcy, the ordinary pleasures of a life. I thought about a man named Emilio Varga, who had no family in this country, and who had agreed to be somewhere for money, and who had died there instead. I thought about Dominic Ferranti, who maintained his innocence until he died in federal prison in 2011. I thought about a retired FBI agent in Scottsdale who had held a surveillance transcript for 22 years because he didn't know who to trust. I thought about a judge in Philadelphia, William Farrell, who was sitting on the bench right now. Today, ruling on cases, wearing a robe, dispensing justice. And I thought, someone has to say the thing out loud. 6 weeks is a long time in an investigation. Things move when you're not looking. I know this. And I violated Shaughnessy's timeline, not entirely, not irresponsibly, but I started making moves while his 6 weeks were still running, because I couldn't afford not to. I filed a Freedom of Information request with the FBI's Philadelphia field office for any records related to a 1993 surveillance operation targeting entities connected to Reardon Callahan, because her ability to defend me was cleaner when she had limited operational knowledge. I asked Diane to focus specifically on William Farrell, his financial disclosures as a state judge, his campaign finance records from his congressional years, any property transactions, any corporate affiliations. She spent 2 weeks on it. What she found was not explosive on its face. It was the kind of thing that only becomes explosive in context. Farrell's congressional campaign in 1990 had received a $25,000 contribution from a real estate development company called Shoreline Capital Group, headquartered in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Shoreline Capital Group had been co-founded by 2 men, a real estate developer named Martin Hess and a man identified in the original incorporation paperwork only as a silent partner with a 40% stake. The silent partner's contribution to the capitalization of Shoreline Capital Group had been made through an entity called, you already know, don't you? Meridian Coastal Partners. The same shell that had wired $340,000 into Sandra Moretti's Naples account in 2019. The thread went from 1990 to 2019. Nearly 30 years. The same structures, the same routing, maintained through deaths and dissolutions and reorganizations and a whole generation of institutional change. Someone had kept it running. I needed to know who. Gerald Hoyt called me in early May. He hadn't called since Arizona. When he called, it was from a different number, not his cell, not his landline. A number I'd trace later to a prepaid phone bought at a convenience store in Tempe. "They know you're looking," he said. I assumed that. "No, specifically, they know about Shaughnessy. Be careful with him. He has more exposure than he's told you." What does that mean? It means he's not just a witness. His exposure goes deeper. He's been receiving payments, not just maintaining the structures passively. He's been an active participant in the reorganization of the assets since Reardon died. Which means if this goes legal, he goes from witness to subject. And subjects make different choices than witnesses. I thought about the 6 weeks I'd promised him. I thought about what he might be doing with 6 weeks if he knew he had serious exposure. "Is he going to run?" I said. "I don't know, but Rachel, don't wait. Whatever you're waiting for, don't wait." He hung up. I sat with that for a long time. The thing about investigation is that you can spend so long building the architecture of a story, gathering sources, verifying documents, mapping relationships, that you lose sight of the fact that the story is not static. The people in it are moving, making decisions. The act of investigation disturbs the thing being investigated, and the disturbance creates reactions, and if you're not careful, the story changes underneath you while you're still building the structure to tell it. I called Diane. "Accelerate everything you're working on," I said. "We're moving faster." "How much faster?" "Weeks, not months." I went back to see Frank Maloney at the New Jersey State Police. I drove to his office in Trenton on a gray morning in May and sat across from him with the specific kind of tiredness that settles into you mid-investigation, not sleepiness, but a kind of cellular fatigue from carrying sustained alertness for too long. I told him more than I had before. Not everything, but enough. About the shell companies, about Shaughnessy, about what Hoyt had told me. He listened. He's a good listener. Cops often are. When I finished, he said, "You know this is going to go federal at some point." "I know. Have you been in contact with the Bureau?" "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment. "I know someone in the organized crime unit in Philadelphia. She's good. She's actually good, not just good on paper. She's been building something adjacent to this for 3 years. Not the Caruso angle specifically, but Calabrese Financial Networks post-2005. There may be overlap." "What's her name?" "Supervisory Special Agent Dana Reyes. She's careful, she's ambitious in the right way, and she won't burn you." "But Rachel," he leaned forward, "once you bring in the FBI, you lose control of the timeline. They move when they're ready to move, not when you are. And their priorities are not the same as yours. I know. Your priority is publishing. Theirs is prosecution. Those things can align, and they can conflict. Be clear about which you're willing to sacrifice." I thought about that for the drive home. Whether I was a journalist first or a citizen first. Whether the story mattered more than the accountability, or whether those were even separable. I've been in this business long enough to know that publishing a story and achieving justice are not the same thing. Sometimes they're not even compatible. Sometimes the story has to come first, because institutions won't move without public pressure. And sometimes the investigation has to come first, because publishing too early collapses the legal case. These are not abstract dilemmas. They're choices that carry real weight. And I've made them badly before. I reached out to Dana Reyes through Frank Maloney as an intermediary. She responded within 24 hours, which told me something about her level of interest. We met in person, not at her office, not anywhere that created a record of our meeting, at a coffee shop on South Street in Philadelphia on a Wednesday afternoon in late May. She was 41, mixed background, Latino and white, with the economy of movement and speech that comes from spending years in environments where every signal is read. She was off-duty, in jeans and a dark jacket, and she looked like someone who was always slightly more alert than the room required. She brought 2 things to the table: The first was a question, "What are you looking for from this conversation?" The second was, after I told her, something she'd brought in a folder that she set on the table between us without opening for the first 10 minutes. "I can't share material from an active investigation," she said. "And I won't, but I can confirm certain general things, or decline to confirm them, in ways that should be useful to you." Okay, there is an active federal investigation into financial networks associated with the historical Calabrese organization. It's not my investigation. I'm an observer and contributor, not the lead. The lead is DOJ in DC. I can't tell you more than that. The Meridian Coastal Structure, does that structure appear in the investigation? She looked at me without expression. She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. She picked up her coffee. I took that as a yes. The individual I've identified as a sitting Pennsylvania State Court judge, does his name appear in the investigation? A longer pause this time. Then she said, "Why do you ask about a judge specifically?" "Because I have evidence connecting him to the network going back to 1990. She looked at the folder on the table. She still hadn't opened it. "I need to ask you something," she said, in the spirit of directness, which I appreciate and which I suspect you do too. "Are you in contact with any individual who is currently in witness protection or any variant of that status?" The question landed with a specific weight. I said, "I have not been in direct contact with any individual in witness protection." I had not. Sandra Moretti was not in witness protection. She was in a condo in Naples, Florida, in a structure of protected invisibility that was private rather than federal. And I had not been in contact with Vincent Caruso, if he was alive, wherever he was. Reyes nodded slowly. She pushed the folder across the table toward me. "This is not bureau material," she said. "This is something I'm sharing in a personal capacity. I want to be very clear about that." Inside the folder was a single printed page. It was a section of a leaked internal memo. She hadn't told me how she'd gotten it. From the Department of Justice's Organized Crime section, dated 2021. The section that was visible had been redacted except for 2 passages. The first passage, evidence of ongoing financial activity consistent with protected status arrangement, unauthorized and extrajudicial. The second, subject believed to be living outside WITSEC framework under informal arrangement made prior to 2000, terms of which may involve ongoing obligation to, redacted, within federal law enforcement infrastructure. I read those 2 passages 4 times. Then I looked up at Reyes. "An informal arrangement," I said, "made before 2000, with someone inside federal law enforcement. That's what the document says. Vincent Caruso's death was staged with the knowledge, or the cooperation, of someone inside the FBI." She picked her coffee up again. She said nothing. I thought of Gerald Hoyt, retired, in Scottsdale, holding a surveillance transcript for 22 years. I thought of what he'd said. There were people inside the bureau who knew that the official story wasn't the whole story. "Was it Hoyt?" I said. She stood up and gathered the folder. She buttoned her jacket. "Be careful, Ms. Morrow," she said. "Whatever you publish, make sure you have everything you need before you publish it. Because once it's out, you can't take it back. And the people who've maintained this for 30 years are not going to be polite about it." She left. I sat at that table for a long time, with my cold coffee, in a coffee shop on South Street in Philadelphia, on a May afternoon with sunlight coming through the windows in a way that felt almost ironic. Gerald Hoyt, who had carried a surveillance transcript for 22 years, who had called me from a prepaid phone in Tempe to warn me about Shaughnessy's exposure, who had invited me to Arizona the moment I mentioned Caruso's name, who had been, perhaps, not the loyal whistleblower I'd understood him to be, but part of the arrangement. The inside contact. The man who, in exchange for something, his retirement, his safety, his silence, had helped Caruso disappear in a way that bypassed official channels. Which meant the file under my door hadn't been sent to me randomly. Someone knew I'd go to Hoyt. And Hoyt had showed me just enough. The surveillance transcript. The 2 names, Subject A and Subject B, to point me toward Reardon and Farrell and away from his own role. I'd been managed, not entirely, but enough. I drove to Scottsdale without calling ahead. Hoyt answered the door in a t-shirt. He looked at me and then he looked past me, past my rental car, at the street, with the particular professional reflex of a man who spent decades doing threat assessment. "Come in," he said. We sat in the same spots on his back patio. Same desert view, different quality of silence between us. "Tell me about the arrangement," I said. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. That, at least, was something. By 1993, he said slowly, the surveillance of Caruso had made clear to me that what he could testify to went far beyond the Calabrese operation. What he knew about the Reardon network, about the political connections, it was genuinely explosive. And it involved people at a level of institutional significance that I was a field agent in Philadelphia. I didn't have the relationships or the standing to take this to the right places without it being suppressed. So instead you made a private deal. What I did, he stopped. Started again. What I did was I gave Caruso a way out. In exchange for his full cooperation, for everything he knew, documented, signed, placed in trust with a sealed set of records, I created an unofficial exit. He wasn't in WITSEC, he wasn't an informant on the Bureau's books. He was a ghost. The arrangement was that if the information he provided ever became necessary, ever became the piece that cracked something open, it would be there. Waiting. And the shooting? The man who died, Emilio Varga? Hoyt was quiet for a long moment. Varga was. Caruso brought me the solution. It was Caruso's arrangement with Varga, not mine. He told me afterward. He stopped. I could have stopped it. If I'd moved faster. If I'd been more decisive about providing him a legitimate exit before he reached out to other options. I could have prevented what happened to Varga. There it was. The weight. The guilt that had been sitting in this man's chest for 30 years. In the Arizona sun, on the patio of a retirement community, an old FBI agent carrying 30 years of a dead man's face. You could have come forward at any time, I said. After Ferranti was convicted, after he died in prison. Yes, why didn't you? Because the information Caruso provided implicates people who are still in positions of power. Farrell is on the bench. There are others, people I haven't named to you yet, people whose influence goes beyond Philadelphia. I waited for a moment when exposure would be safe, when the network had deteriorated enough that the institutional capacity to suppress it had weakened. When there were people in position to act on it. And you decided now is that moment. Someone decided it, I suspect not entirely of their own free will. The document that came under your door, I didn't send it. But I think I know who did. And I think the reason is that something changed recently. Something made the moment urgent. What changed? He looked at me. Farrell has been nominated for the federal bench. The nomination is moving through the Senate Judiciary Committee. If he's confirmed, if he gets lifetime appointment to the Third Circuit, certain protections come with that. Certain insulations. The window for accountability, already 30 years open, begins to close permanently. I felt the full weight of the timeline settle into place. This was why now. This was why the file appeared under my door in March. This was why everything was accelerating. Judge William Farrell was being considered for the federal bench. And someone, Vincent Caruso, maybe, or someone working on his behalf, had decided that before that happened, the right person needed to know the right things. The right person, apparently, was me. There are moments in an investigation when you understand the whole shape of it at once. When the individual pieces you've been holding separately suddenly cohere, and you see the structure, the full architecture, and it's larger and darker and more complete than you'd understood. This was one of those moments. And I need to tell you about the fear, because I've been moving through this story with the professional voice, the controlled, sequential narration of facts, and I don't want to mislead you about what was happening internally. I was afraid, not in a Hollywood way, not in a way that made me want to stop, but in the deep, body-level way that you feel when you understand that you are standing in a particular spot, and that the particular spot you're standing in has consequences that extend beyond your professional world into the simple physical fact of your life. I had found a listening device in my apartment. I had been entered without my knowledge. Someone had called me at 2:17 in the morning to tell me not to trust the file. My source had been managed by the FBI. A man was dead who shouldn't be dead, and a man was alive who shouldn't be alive, and a sitting judge was being elevated to a lifetime federal appointment on the foundation of 30 years of suppressed truth. And I was a 52-year-old freelance journalist with a hotel room in the Inner Harbor, a forensic accountant in Virginia, a retired cop in Trenton, and a laptop with 3 password levels of encryption. I called Lily again. This time I didn't pretend. "I'm in something serious," I said. "I want you to know that, and I want you to know I'm being careful. Real careful, not phone call careful. I have a lawyer, I have copies of everything in 3 separate locations, I have people who know what I know. If anything happens to me, if I go quiet for more than 48 hours without contact, call Ellen Park. Her number is in the emergency contact document in my email. Do you hear me?" Silence on the other end. Then, "Mom, I know. Mom, please, I need you to hear me, Lily. Not worry about me. Hear me. If I go quiet, Ellen Park, I heard you." Her voice was controlled in a way that told me how not controlled she actually was. "Come home soon." I said I would. I meant it. I returned to Baltimore. I worked. For 3 weeks, I worked with an intensity that I've only matched a handful of times in my career. Diane and I built a document, a comprehensive, sourced, annotated account of everything we had. The corporate structures, the surveillance transcript, the wire transfers, the connection between Meridian Coastal Partners and William Farrell's 1990 campaign. The deaths, Reardon, Ferranti, Emilio Varga. The survival, Vincent Caruso. The unofficial arrangement Gerald Hoyt had made in 1993. The DOJ memo suggesting an ongoing informal protection arrangement. We had it verified at 5 separate levels. Legal review from Ellen Park's office. They spent 4 days on it. Financial verification from an independent forensic accounting firm Diane brought in. Historical fact-checking against public records. A retired federal prosecutor whom I will not name but who spent 2 days reviewing the legal architecture of our claims and told me, at the end, that what we had was, his word, actionable. The Senate Judiciary Committee's confirmation hearings for William Farrell were scheduled to begin in 42 days. I made the decision. I reached out to the editors of 2 publications simultaneously, a major national investigative outlet and a legacy newspaper whose legal team I trusted. I told them I had something significant. I told them I needed institutional support, editorial, legal, promotional, to publish it at the right scale. Both were interested. I gave each of them 48 hours to respond. While I waited, 3 things happened. First, Peter Shaughnessy's office called to tell me he was unavailable and would not be returning my calls. When I pushed, the paralegal student told me, quietly, that Mr. Shaughnessy had taken an unexpected leave of absence. Second, I received an email, anonymous, from a Proton Mail account, with a subject line that read, "They know what you have. Stop now." The body of the email was empty. Third, Gerald Hoyt stopped answering his phone. His voicemail was full. When I called the retirement community's main line and asked to speak to a resident, I was told, after a long pause, that they were unable to confirm or deny the status of residents' availability. I drove to Baltimore's FBI field office and asked, at the front desk, to speak to someone in organized crime. I gave my name and said I had information pertaining to an active federal investigation into Calabrese financial networks. I was put in a room and I waited for 45 minutes. Then Dana Reyes walked in. She'd driven from Philadelphia, which meant someone had called her the moment I showed up, which meant she'd been waiting for me to do exactly this. She sat down across from me. "You're ready," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm publishing in 3 weeks regardless," I said. "If the Bureau wants to act before that, the window is 3 weeks. What do you want in exchange?" "I want Dominic Ferranti's conviction reviewed. I want Emilio Varga identified and his family, if any, notified. I want the record corrected." She looked at me for a long time. Ferranti is dead, she said. His name isn't. Another long pause. I can't make promises about judicial reviews. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for acknowledgement that those things matter. That they're part of what this is about. She nodded. Once. Slow. Give me what you have, she said. Everything. Copies, sources, documentation. I need it all. You'll have it, I said. The same day I file with my editors. She looked at me steadily. Farrell's confirmation moves fast. If it goes before publication. I know. I'm moving fast. 2 days before I was ready to file. 2 days before everything was supposed to go to the editors and to Reyes simultaneously, my apartment was entered again. This time, something was taken. My backup drive, a small, encrypted external drive I kept taped to the underside of my filing cabinet drawer. It was gone. The tape was cut cleanly. I stood in my apartment for several minutes before I could think clearly. Then I took out my phone and called Diane. They took the backup, I said. A short, precise silence. How many backups do you have? She said. 4. That was one. The others are. Don't tell me on this line. She's right. She's almost always right. Here's what I want to tell you about that moment. I almost stopped. Not because of fear, or not only because of fear, but because something that had been accumulating throughout those months finally formed itself into a clear shape. The weight of it, the specific ethical mass of what I was doing. A man named Emilio Varga had died so that Vincent Caruso could live. Dominic Ferranti had spent 17 years in federal prison and died there, for a murder he didn't commit, or at least not in the way the record claimed. A retired FBI agent had made a choice he'd regretted for 30 years. A frightened lawyer in Wilmington had spent his whole adult life in the shadow of a decision made when he was in his 20s. A woman in Naples had built her quiet life in Florida on the money of a brother who was simultaneously dead and alive. And a judge, a man in a robe, wielding the power of the American legal system, had used his position to protect and facilitate and benefit from all of it. And was now on the threshold of a lifetime appointment that would make him untouchable in ways that even 30 years of careful silence hadn't quite achieved. Publishing this story would not fix any of it. It wouldn't bring back Varga. It wouldn't restore 17 years of Ferranti's life. It wouldn't undo the corruption of the system that had made all of this possible. It would create consequences. For Farrell, certainly, for Hoyt possibly, for Shaughnessy, for others I hadn't named. It would raise questions that couldn't be unasked. It would put on record things that had lived off the record for 3 decades. Was that enough? I didn't know. I still don't know, but I thought about what the alternative was. The alternative was silence. The alternative was a federal judge on the Third Circuit who knew exactly how much had been sacrificed to put him there. The alternative was the continuation of an arrangement in which the truth about what happened in a parking garage in Atlantic City in February 1994, to a man named Emilio Varga, whose family I still hadn't been able to locate, remained buried under layers of institutional protection and financial architecture. I filed the story. The story ran 6 weeks later, after the most intensive editorial process I've ever been through. 15 hours of legal review. 4 separate fact-checking passes. A call, through my editor's lawyers, to William Farrell's attorney offering the opportunity to respond. The response was a 2-line statement denying all allegations. Hoyt, reachable again by the time we were in final edits, declined to comment on the record but didn't deny anything specific. Shaughnessy returned from his leave of absence and gave, through his own attorney, a carefully worded statement that confirmed the existence of the Reardon Network without confirming his own role in its continuation. The story ran on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the Senate Judiciary Committee had postponed Farrell's confirmation hearing pending review of the allegations. A statement from the committee said they were taking the reported concerns seriously. By Thursday, the DOJ's Public Affairs Office confirmed that there was an ongoing federal investigation into historical financial networks associated with organized crime activity in the Philadelphia region, without confirming or denying any specifics. Dominic Ferranti's daughter. I hadn't known he had a daughter, She was 31, living in Connecticut, contacted my editors asking how to reach me. I called her. She cried. I cried. I'm not ashamed of that. There's still no record of who Emilio Varga was. No family has come forward. No record in U.S. databases matches his name and description. He entered this story as a man without attachments and he has remained one. That haunts me. It will always haunt me. As of the day I'm recording this, William Farrell has taken voluntary administrative leave from the Pennsylvania State Court pending federal review. No charges have been filed. No charges have been announced. The federal investigation continues, in the slow, deliberate way that federal investigations continue, with timelines that bear no relationship to the urgency of their subject matter. Gerald Hoyt has not been charged with anything. He is still in Scottsdale. I believe he knows the full story is not yet told. Vincent Caruso, wherever he is, whoever he has become in 25 years of living as a ghost, has not been located. Has not come forward, is still, officially, dead. Sandra Moretti sold the Naples condo 3 weeks after my story ran. The property records show it went to a buyer in a cash transaction. She has not been located for comment. Peter Shaughnessy's law practice in Wilmington is still open. He is still registered with the Delaware Bar. He has, to my knowledge, retained criminal defense counsel. The listening device removed from my router was analyzed by a private tech security firm. They said the hardware was consistent with commercially available surveillance equipment but had certain modifications suggesting professional deployment. They couldn't determine by whom. I still sleep with the chain on my door. Here's what I want to say to you, at the end of this. I don't know how it ends. I genuinely don't. In American journalism, we're conditioned to want endings, resolutions, convictions, accountability made satisfyingly concrete. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you pull something into the light and the light is enough, because the people who've been operating in the dark can no longer move as freely, and the record is corrected, and the next generation of people who need to make decisions about truth and power have access to something true. That's not nothing, but I want to be honest with you, I don't feel like I won something. I feel like I completed an obligation. To Emilio Varga, who has no name in the record. To Dominic Ferranti, whose innocence, or partial innocence, deserved to be spoken out loud before now. To the larger proposition that power doesn't get to write its own history unchallenged, not forever, not completely. The night the story ran, I went back to that hotel in the Inner Harbor. Same Marriott, different room. I ordered room service and I ate it slowly, looking out at the harbor, watching the lights on the water. And I thought about all the things this story hadn't resolved, and all the things it had started. And the distance between those two categories. My phone rang at 11:47. Unknown number. I answered. There was silence for a moment. Then a man's voice, older, careful, with the particular quality of someone speaking through years of practiced caution. He said, "You told as much of the truth as you could." I said, "Who is this?" And the line went dead. I sat there for a long time. I still don't know if it was him. I still don't know if I wanted to have been.